Welcome back to another episode of Hobby Time in the Murder Basement, where in this episode, I get to sit down and talk with Justin Sirois from Severed Books. He has written such books as Beneath the Inverted Church. He's made such massive gelatinous cubes, of which you get to see one in the video. He is also the illustrator and publisher of the new Tomb of the Bitchin' Chimera 5e Dead Milkman module. So glad I got to talk to him. Like, share, subscribe. Thank you so much for being here. Justin, thank you so much for joining me in the Murder Basement. If you have not followed Justin's work, he runs Severed Books, does kind of D&D tabletop RPG modules in like the OSR, old school Renaissance style, more like hard-boiled, more hard-hitting. Also, who I would probably say is probably one of the first outward socially conscious OSR writers that has specifically come out and said these are not used to be male fantasy, violence against women things, and really cause you to think differently about the medium. And it's just super impressive to be into it. So, Justin, thank you so much for coming out and hanging out with me in the Murder Basement today.
I'm excited and honored, and we were saying earlier that we don't get to chat as much as we want about games, and this is a great long form opportunity to do that. So,
yeah.
Let's fuck it up.
Dude, I love it. So I found your stuff earlier this year. I was trying to figure out what was my introduction to OSR, because that was a term that I'd never heard of. I'd never heard of the idea of anything else but people just either doing Pathfinder or 5e. And like when doing those worlds, I bounce off of them. Like I don't want to min-max my tabletop RPG. I want it to be warts and all weird. I like the idea that I can die. And that was something that like, I don't know, like 5e just felt too safe. And like and I always explain it in the terms of when you look at old school essentials and you read their like little blurb on what magic missile is, and you look at 5e's like page and a half like dissertation on what it looks like, I was like, I don't know, I just bounced off of that. And so when I found OSR, like I was just like, oh, holy crap, like people are doing tabletop stuff the way that I think I would do it. And like that was really cool. You were one of the first people that I stumbled on, because I think at the time you were doing Sickest Witch and on Kickstarter, and then I looked up Sickest Witch, I bought it, I saw it, I was like, this artwork is badass, this is cool, who is this guy? So how did you get yourself like mired square into this like kind of esoteric tabletop RPG world?
Man, so when I guess it was about 4.5-5 years ago, I was playing a crap ton of video games, like just all the time, and also like writing about video games. Like I had a freelance job writing for the Baltimore City paper on like a macro level. Like once a month they were like, choose a game or a game topic and write about it in the context of politics or the environment or something like that.
Sure.
And that was wicked fun, but I was like playing like Dark Souls exclusively for 300 hours,
Right. Oh, I've been there.
And like, I turned 37 and I had a kid, and I was like really like thinking about like all my screen time and how probably unhealthy that was for me. So it was sort of a perfect opportunity to maybe switch gears, and I started thinking about tabletop games. And oddly enough, Ken Bowman, who published Maze the Blue Medusa, is a good friend of mine. But from like the avant-garde fiction world. So like this is like a really strange connection. So he had just published Maze the Blue Medusa, and he was on sort of like this like sabbatical tour on the East Coast, and he went from Maine all the way down to I think Georgia or Atlanta, and he stopped at my house in Baltimore, and he's like, hey, can I run Blue Medusa, and I was like, fuck yeah, like please. So last minute, I called my friend Jimmy. He came over into the basement, and I called Zeb Cook, who I barely knew, or emailed him, and I was like, dude, like, here's the story. If you have time, come on over and play this game with us. And he actually showed up. So one of my first gaming experiences was playing Maze of the Blue Medusa with Zeb Cook in a basement in my house. And I was 37. So like, I'll be really frank. Like, I don't have this like long tabletop lineage that goes back to when I was like 13.
Right.
I wish I had. But I grew up in New Hampshire, and I don't know who I would have played with because we were in the woods. So
right.
So yeah, like, and I am so oddly lucky for that experience because coming from a story and narrative first perspective and sort of like rules 10th, not even second or third or fourth. I mean, like in like improvisation first and reacting and being human first. I think having that experience with Ken and Blue Medusa was really formative and special. So that really shaped a lot of the next 4.5, 5 years of my life up until now.
Nice.
Yeah.
So when did you start writing, like, because like that it seems like you have done, and if it's only been 4 years, you've done an absurd amount of shit. like
Yeah.
like either like you are like me and are completely fucking obsessive about everything you jump into, and you're just like, well, we're in the deep end and we're doing it now,
Yeah.
or the you had already been working on stories, because like Beneath is your first big Kickstarter, and the book is 600 pages. It
Yeah.
is not small.
Yeah, it's a long one. So I think that discipline, like I had written a bunch of novels before doing RPG writing. One series was 900 pages, and I think like having that discipline and applying it to game writing and game design wasn't an easy switch because it's a very different discipline. I was sort of naive, and I was like, oh fuck, like since I've written novels, like this is going to be a breeze. And then
I got this. Yeah.
it's not a breeze. It's really difficult. So I think, like I tell everybody, my secret is like, I have a full-time job still. I get up at 6 a.m., do that until 2:30, and then every single day from 2:45 until 5 p.m., I work on my creative stuff. And I've done that for 20 years.
Oh my God, that's intense. That's
Yeah,
absolutely intense.
every day. I mean, sometimes on the weekends, but I have a family and stuff, but it's really like, it's allowed me to amass not just a portfolio of skills, drawing and writing and design and whatever. It's also, I don't know, it's let me build up a collection of like intellectual property that I can sort of like dive into and pick from.
Sure.
And I'm always stealing from myself in weird ways, like a lot of Beneath came from my early work. Like all of my early work was about technology and how the internet is changing people, and there's always this like weird like social technological thing going on. And Beneath, I basically just spun it into a fantasy world and started thinking like, what if the internet literally invaded a low fantasy setting? Like, what if like the players had no idea that the fucking internet was coming out of a portal? Like, and it's a really it's a meta dungeon. It's funny, but that was the idea.
That's I think that is really interesting. And Beneath tackles a lot of really serious like ideas, and you just in like the intro to it, you're talking about how this is kind of based of the the Dungeons and Dragons of the Satanic Panic era, and so it's meant to be evocative, but it in the hands of people who aren't mature enough, it can come off misogynistic and toxic, and it shouldn't be played that way. You specifically say that the main character of the story is not meant to be sexually exploited at all, and I've never read rules of like talk about bouncing off of like 5e because it's just too much rules and too much stuff. You straight up set up the expectation to say, don't fuck with this world, because this world, there's something good here that I want you to experience, and I want you to look at this. And I think that the era of like the OSR stuff had a really like toxic sort of masculinity face to it for a really long time, and maybe still does have some of it. But as soon as I read that, I was just like, I really appreciate that. I really appreciate that, because one of my first experiences with trying to play Dungeons and Dragons with friends was a girl invited me into a group that they had been playing for 11 years. And that's dangerous. Like, I shouldn't be like invited into a group, especially by not the DM. And I was like, oh, cool. Yeah, I'll come and hang out with these people. And it turned out the DM had a crush on her. He didn't want me to play. And as punishment, he had her character raped in the game, and it destroyed the group. Like, it fucking destroyed the group. And she told me about it crying, and I was like, wait a second, that's something that can happen in D&D? And she's like, yeah. I was like, I don't want to play with you guys. Like, I don't want to do this. I don't want anything to do with this. And it was something that I'd never considered to be a thing, and it turned me off the whole tabletop RPG thing until like literally about 2 years ago. I started like playing around with the idea of it. And
that
so
is
when
so abusive.
it's so abusive. And so when I saw you write that and you're just like starter, like, thank you for buying this book, it hit me. It pierced me in a way that I was just like, I'm so glad that people are standing up for, you know, like this book will go places, and your art goes places in that book. But like, it is in no ways meant to be a thing that's just like a male power fantasy against, you know, abusive women. And that it means so much to me. Like flat out, you could never do anything again and you'd still be like top of the pyramid, because you set the expectation to say, fuck this, that's bullshit. I love that.
Thank you. I also felt like if I was going to produce a book that's as explicit as Beneath, and there's some explicit stuff in there.
Hell yeah.
For sure.
For sure.
I think it would be irresponsible of me not to, within that sandbox, like give those guide rails. But yeah, I mean, I hope no one has taken that book and done anything gross with it.
Well, I mean, like, I think that there is kind of like two different OSR players now. And like, I don't know James Raggy from the Lamentations of the Flame Princess family, but he definitely pushed the boundaries early on. And for better or for worse, because some of the stuff that he has released, his work has been great. Some of the stuff that family has released, but it has also brought along an entire slew of baggage. And it's one of those, that water is so murky and so weird. And like, you decided to self-publish instead of going after publishing with someone like, you know, Lamentations of the Flame Princess. And I thought that was really interesting as well, because you know, you did something that is also like, I wrote this thing, I illustrated it, and I published it. Like, you're the triple threat at that point as well. Like, what was your ideas of avoiding going to another publishing house?
Well, right before I got into tabletop gaming, I had published So Say the Waiters, that series that I mentioned before, the 900-page series. And that was optioned for TV for 4 years. And it was the most miserable experience I've ever had.
Oh, no.
I learned so much from just researching and talking to the producers and all this stuff. You know, writing like a show Bible and a series outline and a pilot and all this junk. But it made me realize that there's so much power in IP ownership. And oftentimes I talk about like stocks. Like what is a stock in a company? It is intellectual property that you own a very tiny fraction of.
Right.
So wealthy people, they have a portfolio of micro IPs. I own a little bit of Google. I own a little bit of Amazon, whatever.
Right.
We live in a very awesome age where you and I can create IP. That's always been the case. You could always create it. Like, you could always draw it or write it.
Right.
But we can also print it on demand with no expense. We can crowdfund it, and we can disseminate, or we can spread it around the world, you know, through PDFs. You don't even have to ship anything anymore, really. So that's a really unique opportunity in time and history. Like, it's never really happened before for like the RPG audience. So it's fairly new. Like, it kind of happened. It happened with the record industry, like indie rock or punk rock back in the 80s and 90s. I think we're going through a similar thing right now where, like, why not control your IP and have a portfolio of your own shit that you can, like, own forever? Well, you'll die, and then 75 years after that, then it's public domain. Right. But it's like, I literally think that way as a business and as a creative person, to just collect IP and, like, create it, care for it, make it as best, like, the coolest thing you possibly can, and then manage it under a brand like Severed Books. Like, I care so deeply about that brand. So yeah, that's a long answer to that's why I didn't go with a publisher. And I feel like I learned that the hard way from those 4 years of really getting burned on that whole TV deal.
Yeah, so tell me about that, because on your the Amazon listing, it still says optioned for TV on the book.
Yeah, it's no longer optioned. So yeah, like, I wrote. It's a 3-book series. I wrote the first book in a month. I have never written that fast in my life. And then I sent it off to a bunch of people, and this one producer from The Wire was like, I want it. Like, I'm from Baltimore. I get it. Like, I understand what you're doing with it. And, you know, after 4 years of miscommunication, and his brother passed away, and just, like, weird life stuff happening, nothing really happened. We got really close with Anonymous Content. They're like a great studio, but that didn't happen. And then the Duplass brothers put out this movie called Take Me, which is basically pretty close to my idea. I mean, it's not like beat for beat, but if you watch Take Me and then read my synopsis of my series, it's pretty damn close. So that's when we gave up.
No, that's a bummer. And I mean, you just have to look at it as brilliant minds think alike sort of thing,
I guess. Yeah. Take Me was a shit movie, but it was okay. I don't know. But you know, that was one of the hardest days of my life. Like, the producer was like, "Oh, have you seen this trailer for this movie?" And I was like, "No." So I got on Netflix. It was like a straight to Netflix movie, and I watched it that night. It took me like 4 hours to watch it because I had to take notes. And then I went to the bar and I cried, like, literally cried at the bar. This guy.
You know, Hank Williams wrote tears in my beer for a reason. That's a thing that happens, man. Yeah. We've all been there.
Yeah. But, you know, you got to suck it up and you got to move on. So
yeah.
Then I did some games.
Did some games. So, like, you went from trying to write your own books. Are you like just a freelancer during the day to do a bunch of stuff, or do you have like a standard job every single day that you
have the most standard job you can think of. So I've been with the communications department at a federal agency for 16 years.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm all about job security and stability. I'm like, my mailman is like, I want to do this. It's like, I love that, and I implore you to explore your bliss. But also, like, insurance is fucking amazing, and being in self-employed is horrible. It's absolutely horrible. Yeah. So, like, don't give it up unless you got something really good on the line. That's
where we're at. And, you know, with a family and stuff, you're like, I don't know what we would do without this security. So
yeah, I feel it's really interesting to think that our creative lives have to be put on hold for the just normal everyday grind, and especially when you're like, at this point, like, you know, I'm 37 in a couple weeks. At this point, all I want to do is the creative stuff. I'm like, I've put it on hold for so long. like, why can't I play with these synthesizers and make music, all day long and get paid for it? How come I can't paint minis all day and get paid for it, make YouTube, like it kind of sucks to like every day like put those emotions on hold.
Yeah.
And I'm finding that it's starting to bleed into my creative outlets in very interesting ways.
Yeah. It
um
it does suck because, like, we live in supposedly the richest country in the history of the world, and
right.
we're all still working like 60 hours a week
Yeah,
to make ends
yeah.
meet. It just doesn't really make sense to me. We should be working 3 days a week, and we should all be making 100K a year and having fun.
Yeah, I
That's
think
a
that
possibility.
yeah, why, like this late stage capitalism that we're kind of in, where it's
Mhm.
just like, it feels like the shambling corpse is just gonna like fall down dead in the desert, and it just
Yep.
like keeps on moving for some reason. You're like, how have like, and COVID has really like forced me to look at it differently of like what industries are really important and what industries need people. Like the human capital is so different.
Yeah.
um and custom businesses, like my business is like seeing a real boom right now, and it's so cool. But it also like hurts my heart for everybody else that like I'm feel fortunate that I can wake up and keep on doing this thing. And I know other people that just like they don't have the same sort of day-to-day value. It's kind of hard to wrap your head around.
Yeah, it really is. The system isn't built to be empathetic.
No, no.
It's just not, and like that's what government's for, but that's broken too. So,
Yeah, right.
you know,
What do you do? So you going into your first was beneath your first Kickstarter, or had you used Kickstarter before?
I kickstarted. I'm glad I pulled these out. So this is Dungeon Dealer. Um, these were like map making card decks.
Nice.
You just shuffle them, roll a d20 for northeast, southwest, and you can like make a dungeon on the fly. So this was the first one, and then I did Beneath. But this really set me up to like have a little like wiggle room because the money I made from this, like I invested in the cover for Beneath.
It's so good. It's so good. It's such a good cover.
The most expensive image I've ever licensed. But yeah, it really summed it all up. And her body actually makes an inverted cross. I don't know. I mean, it's pretty like it's the full image. She's a little bit longer, but I wanted to like be a little subtle there. But yeah, reinvested a little bit of money into Beneath, and it worked out.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, like you played the Kickstarter game in the way that I like to buy the Kickstarter game. Like you are constantly putting something, like especially this year. I've got gelatinous dies coming on the way that I'm very excited for.
Yeah.
I got Sick of Switch. I think at one point, oh my god, it's huge. It's
Yeah,
so
it's
big.
massive. I'm a short guy, but man, these are these are big. Oh,
So I have a buddy who he only plays GURPS.
okay.
That's his only RPG setup, and he always does these fun little one shots. And I thought about getting 3 of those to having as my GURPS die, and just be like,
Yes. Yes.
uh, I I I respect the fuck out of the hustle.
Mhm.
Like that is a thing that I'm starting to realize the older that I get, the things that really drives me crazy about creatives is they're always waiting for things to be perfect. They're always waiting for their artwork to be perfect. They're always waiting for the thing. And you you I think are very much like me in the, if not today, like then it's never going to happen. Like
Right.
now is always the best time to do something. And I've watched you have a lot of success like pretty rapidly. And Kickstarter can be super cruel, and yours always funds, and it seems very consistent, and you always are like promoting the next one. And I'm like, man, if I wore fanny packs, I would totally rock a mimic fanny pack. Like stuff like that. Like I never fucking thought
Yeah.
at 37 I'd be like, I want to buy a fucking mimic fanny pack right now.
Gotcha. Well, all right. Um, I got a lot of shit for saying this on Facebook maybe a year ago. One of my friends was really upset. And I typed in there, I was like, ideas are nothing. And that was it. I, I, no, I was also like, we have to stop teaching kids that ideas are something. Or I can't remember exactly what he said. And what I was getting at is that ideas aren't products. Like ideas aren't physical anything.
Right.
Ideas, they do matter. They matter a lot. Ideas, of course they do.
Right.
But we can have all the great ideas in the world and not have the skills or discipline to create something. And those ideas, they stay in your head and they're nothing. Literally nothing.
Yeah. They're
So
dreams. Dreams
uh,
aren't currency.
yeah, and like when I say products, I don't want to sound capitalist, but I want to be like, ideas aren't a mug. This is a physical thing that I can touch and it's in real life.
Right.
It might sound funny, but like I really want to stress to people that like if you have a good idea and you don't have the skills to like materialize it, team up with someone or find a mentor and just email them. I've done that so many times in my life. Like when I wrote my first book, there was Dar Jamal wrote Beyond the Green Zone, and I emailed him like just cold. I was like, dude, if I get my manuscript together, will you please blurb my novel? I love what you've done. Praise, praise, praise. And he got back to me, and 2 years later, he gave me a blurb for the novel. And
Nice.
this is like a journalist who's worked with Al Jazeera and like all these different outlets. So I guess my point is, don't wait. If you have a great idea, write it down. Write down everything. Boil it down to the best stuff. And if you don't have the skills to create it, just ask someone and team up because you're gonna regret not doing it. You're gonna like really, really beat yourself up if you don't do it. And it doesn't have to be perfect. Like what you said, like it doesn't. Oh, none of my stuff is perfect. A lot of it is very unperfect. Um, and another thing I like to say is like your flaws are your style.
Sure.
So like I used to teach little workshops with kids, and I always used to say like, if all of you knew how to paint naturalistically or photorealistically, you'd all paint the same way.
Right.
You'd paint perfectly and it'd be beautiful, but you'd have zero style.
Right.
And what you do as a creative person for your life is you realize that you have limitations and you make a mark on a piece of paper and it might slip a little bit and you do that 10,000 times and that mark becomes your style. You have that muscle memory. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, that's Justin's style because he
Right.
just kept doing it. And he's actually making it look cool. So just know that like those mistakes or those flaws, if you keep doing it, they add up and they compound into like who you are. And that's rad. That's actually kind of like uplifting because like yeah, I can keep making mistakes. And as long as I know which ones are shitty and which ones are, development, then
Endearing. Yeah. The ones that you're like, I think this is me.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And just keep practicing and find those people to collaborate with.
It's really inspiring to hear that, and it's something that like I've been a musician since I was really young. Music was always a part of it, but like I started a punk band before I even knew what the fuck punk was. Like me and my buddy were like, we're gonna be in a band and we're gonna do this and this is gonna be the thing it is.
Yeah.
And so many people around us are like, I can't wait till I'm in a band. I was like, what is stopping you? We literally don't have instruments, and we have songs that we have like done
Yeah.
things. And so we were like 14 years old, farting into the couch, but we had a whole bunch of like weird little ideas and topics. And I'm all about the just doing it and getting out there. And like I just released 2 albums of, to say junk is wrong, because they're sketches, they're ideas of songs that I'm probably never going to flesh out, and there's mistakes all over in them. For the 30 seconds that sounds perfect, I will then flub a note right in the middle of it, and I'm like, I could go back and fix it, but I don't want to.
Yeah.
This thing is done, and I have sold more of those albums than I have of the albums that I have slaved for 6 months, slaved for a year over.
Yeah.
I I'm finding myself to be first idea, best idea, run at it. If you need to, redo it later on, I mean, it's nobody cares. Everybody just wants to support a creative right now, and I'm just pushing people to explore those things, whether it's painting, whether it's illustration, whether it's writing. Don't wait. Don't wait at all, because time's the only thing we don't get back.
That's absolutely true. Just hammer away at it, and it's to make it fun, only make and produce the stuff that you would buy yourself, usually you, in your heart, you sort of know, this idea is great, or this project isn't, I don't know, it's just not right. And I have way more of those that I put on the shelf than ones that were successful. So,
right. But I mean, those ones on the shelf, those can always be, they're I always call those the Legos. They're just the Legos for something bigger, something else. They're the pieces, parts that I'm like, oh yeah, no, this needs this here. We need this flat top there. The idea that, I mean, I've forgotten more songs that I've written than I have recorded. It's just you can't be super precious with your art, because it's always the next thing that you do. If you have the outlook that the next thing that you do is the best thing that you're going to do, even if it's not, you're going to always keep on working better, and each project's going to be better, and you're always going to be happy with it, because you're already admitting that this isn't going to be the pinnacle of your work. The next one will be, and then the next one will be, and you'll never get real writer's block. You'll never get pinched by the self-doubt, because what you're doing is you're always telling yourself that you're working on your craft, you're working on your trade, and that's really hard for people who have never put themselves in front of it. It seems to be the one that keeps on coming up a lot. So you are generally the writer, and now you had this opportunity that is, for me, one of the most special things that has happened during quarantine. For my wife, might actually get her to play some tabletop RPGs. How the fuck did you manage to find somebody to work with the Dead Milkman to write Tomb of the Bitchin' Chimera, which as of right now on Kickstarter is at $44,000, which is awesome, and you got about a week left, which means you'll have another boost right at the end. I'm so excited for everybody. I got my limited edition box I was awesome. Day one, limited edition box. Your artwork is so fucking badass, and the sense of humor around it, the writing and the direction of it, I'm like, oh, this is going to be something that I think for people my age and a little bit older, they're gonna fucking eat this up.
I think so. And it's just wonderfully written. Andrew did an amazing job, because he just cares. He deeply cares, and he knows the band personally. So to answer your question, I was at PAX Unplugged in Philly 2 years ago.
Okay.
And Andrew, he messaged me. He saw that I was going to be there, and he's like, "Hey, if you want to meet up and play with my my friends, want to sit in on a game, you're invited." And I was like, "Well, I'm going to have my own crew, so we're just going to be drunk and running around the whole time." But I think we did say hello that time, and then the next year I ran into him again, and he was like, "Hey, I would love to publish with you. I know that Matthew Simmons, who's a great writer on the West Coast, and this is a dude from the sort of avant-garde fiction world, and they all play D&D. So he was like, if I team up with Matthew and we have a project, would you publish it? And I basically said yes. I was like, yeah, I'll do it. Whatever you guys want. Okay.
Yeah.
So they came to me with this really crazy idea that wasn't the Dead Milkman thing, and we worked on that for a little while, and then COVID hit. Or maybe I'm getting a little mixed up. We worked on it for a little while. It kind of like petered out. And then in the meantime, Andrew was like, hey, I went to this Dead Milkman concert. They played in a cemetery. I wrote a OSR adventure that's Dead Milkman themed. We played it in the cemetery before the show, and it was a hit. And the band is letting me do something with it. Like, do you want to publish it? And I was like, yeah. How do I say no to that?
Right.
And growing up, like, I was more of like a grindcore, like hardcore kid,
Yeah. Brutal Truth and all that fun stuff.
or like Locust and like the West Coast, like
Dude,
31G.
have you seen my giant monoroid print that's behind me here?
No.
Like, I'm a huge Locust fan.
Awesome. That was our shit, man. Like, just, I don't know. we were crazy. But yeah, like the Dead Milkman really wasn't on my mind so much
Sure.
growing up. But
we all knew Punk Rock Girl, and we all sang it like karaoke when it came on with our friends while we were slamming PBRs. We knew it.
Absolutely.
You loved it.
Yes, loved it. But yeah, I said yes, let's do it. And it was a pretty slow development. I can't remember when Andrew sent me the book, but then I just started knocking out the illustrations, and it was really gelling really well. And we launched the Kickstarter, and the band, they signed contracts and they knew about it, but they weren't like really thinking about it when we launched the Kickstarter. Kind of caught them off guard, and they were like, "Holy crap!" So like then they started blasting it out, and Will Wheaton put it on Facebook, and now he's going to be in the book. Like, he bought one of the higher pledges. So
Oh, cool. Dude, that's so awesome. So like, what is a development cycle like that? Because like, if you ask me, I've seen things like this where you're like, I've been working on this for the last year and a half of my life, but like, I when you see something that it feels so fun and spontaneous as this, like you hope that it has that same sort of like roots, but also like, I don't know, like when I see something, it kind of just seems like magic. Like this, like when you see like a big band doing this, like I guess My Chemical Romance just did a thing based off of like Plague Rats or some band, or As I Lay Dying, and there's like a record with it. Like that seems like something that is like manufactured because
right.
they're going to a huge audience. Like this feels like the zine days. This feels like this happened. This is friends. It actually feels like way more Dead Milkman, and it's awesome that they weren't really actually that big of a part of it. It feels out of that era.
That makes me happy, and I think the writer would be really happy too, because that truly that is what it is. He wrote it for his friends. They played before the show. Then they watch the show in the graveyard, and then like the adventure takes place, and some of it is in a graveyard, and it's very circular, and but yeah, it was pretty fast and dirty, and I draw fast, he writes fast. We just kind of like slammed it together, and it definitely looks good. Like we care about what the product looks like, so
yeah. Well, and your artwork is really stunning. I mean, just the Life is Shit graveyard image on there. I showed that to my business partner. He's not a punk fan. He is like, the other day he was like listening to like Hot Chocolate, disco. Like he top like pop guy, but he loves the Dead Milkman. He like, there's just something about it that like, and so I showed him that, and he just like started giggling, and I like. Hearing giggle is one of the best things in the world, because he's an introvert. He doesn't really like to show his emotions a whole lot, and when he saw that, it was just like, I was like, oh, this has got some magic in it. And that one, when the graveyard image is just so striking, and and the map. I think that this is the only 5e module with a trailer park in it.
Yeah. It is chock full of puns. People are gonna, if you're familiar with the Dead Milkman, you're gonna die laughing the entire time. It's great. And Andrew, he was clever, like he really set up a sandbox with Tiny Town. If he wants to, he could expand and do side quests from one location to the next. So I told him, I was like, if you don't create anything else, the fans are going to. Like, I guarantee within a year, you're going to have some like fans content, which is exciting too. Like I love the nature of this hobby, this industry, like how interactive it is and how accepting it is to third-party, unlicensed, whatever,
You got to give it up to Wizards of the Coast for not fucking that aspect of this up. The
Right.
open games license, they could have. And they had every right to. Like when they buy an IP like Dungeons and Dragons, they could have locked that shit down. And I'm so glad they didn't, because I think it would have killed it. Because the third party stuff, if it wasn't for third party stuff, I wouldn't be into this right now.
Me
You and
neither.
I would not be talking, man. That third party
Yeah.
stuff is magic, absolute
Yeah.
magic.
Yeah. They're smart, like you can't pay for better marketing. You can't.
No, you can't.
So, and it was born in a basement, like Gygax. The poor guy, he died penniless for different reasons, but
Right.
For something that is like a true American folk art. I mean, it's kind of weird to say that, but like tabletop role playing is an American folk art, right? Like, can you,
Sure.
as much as like jazz or whatever, it was born here. It definitely took influences from like Tolkien and stuff, of course.
Of course.
But I think like when history sort of like ends or whatever, people are going to look back at like tabletop role playing in the same way that they do with like graphic novels. Like,
Sure.
I worked in a comic store in the 90s in high school, and I got made fun of all the time for working there. It wasn't cool to work there. My friends were rad and they helped me out, but man, like I got some shit for it.
Sure.
But now, like, I went to college, and during that era, like Adrian Tomane and like McSweeney's and like all these publishing houses, like they helped graphic novels and art or comic artists become something different. Like
Sure.
Chris Ware and all those guys. Like now, like they're respected like novelists. So I hope that tabletop RPGs are headed in that direction, and I think that like the dudes who are making independent stuff have that opportunity to really push the envelope and make thought-provoking, empathetic, cool content. So,
And I mean, like right now, like Free League is when I start thinking of like the tabletop RPG thing. And I know they're Swedish, but like think of like Tales from the Loop. Like Tales from the Loop is one of the most like emotional rule books I've ever read. And like I don't know if I'll ever convince any of my friends to play it, because they like to min-max stuff, like they want to like kill dungeons make sense to them. So like, the OSR thing kind of like makes this perfect timing in our lives. But like that whole like system is built around like an emotional back and forth between a game master and the player. It is not the game master dictating what the game is. It is, how does this make you feel? Maybe you should roll on it, and that's a really interesting idea to tackle a rule set that I think Vampire largely missed on for me. Like it was a little too amorphic as a a storytelling device. Like it was kind of just left up and it was gonzo and you could do whatever the fuck you want.
yeah.
Like I like the Tales from the Loop idea, because I think that it will make stories, and it will like it's already turned like their TV show is like one of the most emotionally devastating TV shows I've ever watched.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting that it came from just like an art book from some Swedish guy who just
It is so backwards.
robots. Yeah, it's so backwards.
Art book to tabletop game to Amazon TV show. Like what?
And I think that it's a real success. And and when you like say folk art here in the United States, I think of like people like Stephen King, like the horror movie, horror book Like Guru, I don't think he's a good writer. I think he's a great storyteller. Like
Mhm.
he writes, like I was reading Stephen King in third grade and understanding and comprehending it perfectly. And if a third grader's like reading it perfectly, the writing is really basic, but he's making these stories. And like, I think, 100 years in the future, we'll be looking at Stephen King as like one of the greatest American folk artists ever. Like
I agree with you. Yeah.
his nightmares that he gave us, and even his hopeful stuff is touching us. And I think that D&D, OSR, American storytelling, these are all intertwined there, because his stories kind of feel like that. They feel like, what would they be doing right now?
Yeah.
Like,
I'm gonna blow your mind a little bit.
okay.
In sixth grade, our teacher, Mrs. White, she read to us after recess just for 15 or 20 minutes. And my mom had just finished Eyes of the Dragon, and she was telling me about it. And I was like, do you think I could bring it to school and give it to Miss White, and maybe she can read it to us? And my mom laughed. She's like, just no way is she going to read a Stephen King novel. So I brought it to school, and Mrs. White read it herself and adored it, and read it to the entire fucking class. And it was amazing. It was awesome. It was the best.
Every teacher was like, oh, you're reading Stephen King, what do you think of this? I'm like, well, I really like this aspect of the story. Like it's a great equalizer as far as storytelling, because when adults and kids can see eye to eye on it, like that's some really amazing shit there. And I think that Stephen King gets a lot of shit for just being like the same thing over and over again, but I think that the way we will look back on his legacy is going to be very different than what it is now. And he's touched us all in so many different ways, and he's changed just like pop culture, and I think that's unbelievable.
Yeah, they're fables, like we need those
fables,
those storytellers. We'll always need those people,
Yeah.
And the next one's out there. It's not me, it's not you, but it's somebody watching, probably.
Why can't it be you, though? I mean, unless you don't want to be.
I know because I've found my niche and I've drilled down, and I'm just not universal enough.
Fair enough.
I know my limitations.
Sure. So what is your next sort of thing that you're working on? Because you're Beneath is behind you. You got Dead Milkman is going to be over soon. What's your next project? What's your next timeline? Because I'm really excited to see where you go, because I find your work and your path of just bravely plowing through really, really inspiring.
Thanks. That means a lot. So I've been working on a board type-ish game for a while. In the meantime, I've just been drawing all the assets for it and writing a lot of the cards. But this is Elsinore. But I've been working on that for a year and a half off and on, and it feels really good. I think that it's got a lot of compelling elements, but I think we were chatting before. It's missing one mechanic for strategy that will really elevate it.
Sure.
But I don't expect to put that out for a long time. But then in the meantime, I'm doing a second edition of the gelatinous cubes that I don't want to spoil what they're going to look like, but they're leveling up a little bit. So there's that.
Love that.
And then my buddy George Holland, he is the co-creator of Overlight, and he has been sending me stuff, IP stuff that we're going to start developing together. So I'll be drawing his writing, his adventures. So
excellent.
He is one dark dude, and I'm very happy to be collaborating with him. So yeah, there's that.
What's the theme of the board game, if you don't mind me asking? What is the to get you into the board game?
Well, I don't want to show too much, but let's see. So I've drawn all of these hex loot cards. So you're building your character, you're getting like tons and tons of loot and building this sort of hex-shaped character sheet.
Uh-huh.
And there's helmets and familiars and all this stuff. So much like Escape the Dark Castle, it's prompted with like story cards, and you're reacting to the next prompt. It's way more narrative. Like there's like a sort of like a long form chapter narrative to it. And then with every encounter, you're looting the body of the NPC that you murdered, and then building your character from that loot. But then there's a whole color system where you're supposed to color match and optimize your loadout to get more powerful.
Kind of like a little Kingdom Death sort of like.
Yeah, with the grid.
Yeah, the grid system. Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So there's that. It definitely needs less luck and more strategy. And I feel like I'm kind of stuck. I'm just a little stuck. Justin is stuck.
Well, Escape the Dark Castle is one of those games, and I think that was really the game that got me into the OSR idea. So it's like the black and white art is so good, and like when you hear Tom Vassell from Dice Tower say that he hates this is the ugliest game he's ever played, I'm like, dude, this is the best game.
Is that what he said?
Yeah, he just like shit all over that game.
What a turd.
What the hell, man? The art is so good on this. It's not meant to be fucking Gloomhaven.
No,
it's totally different.
It's a little sophomoric, but that's the point. It's like it's so punk. It's like so renegade.
Yeah.
That Tom Vassell.
Every once in a while, he says something that I like want to jump through the screen and just like slap the shit out of him. Like, dude, can you like? Why would you say that?
Sorry, my cat is get off my shelf. Sorry. The cat's on the collectibles.
Yeah, you gotta cover them up. But yeah, like I don't understand. I don't understand his whole outlook on that. And I was like, to me, this is like, it reminds me of like 90s like commercials and video game ads, the stuff that like I would be looking at that and be like, oh, this game's going to be good, even if it was complete garbage. Like it totally got me. And then like I bought it and I enjoyed it. I thought that was fantastic, and like the Kingdom Death thing's really interesting though, because like Kingdom Death as a system, the AI of the monster is great. That's the thing that like when you mentioned it to me, what you were talking about is like, as long as you have like a good like like combative mechanic, like that's the thing that like people really get into these days, and I think it's like the most special aspect of Kingdom Death. But like you're right, if the color system, if you are matching things right, you become like OP super quick in that game, which is I mean, you're still gonna die fucking walking to the battle for some reason, because that game doesn't win the battles are so good, but everything else around them is like too random, and you're like, oh, and I fell into a spike pit and I'm dead. Okay, all right, yeah, like start over a new character.
House rules. I'm gonna fix that real quick.
Yeah. So like, what's your opinion on house ruling stuff? Do you do things like that? Have you ever just like sat down and been like, I love this game so much, but I hate the way it plays, and just like rewrote the rules from scratch?
Not from scratch, but occasionally, if I'm sitting down and I'm my time is pretty valuable and I don't get to be with my friends that often, if we're gonna play a game and there's something that's making it miserable, I'm gonna change it.
Yeah.
If it's not game breaking, you have to do that really cautiously. But yeah, like I played Jaws of the Lion solo with 2 characters because it's COVID times, and I sat here and I had a blast. But there were a few things I was like, you know what, I'm not gonna like replay this entire scenario by myself. because that's not fun. I'm just
Right.
gonna like I'm gonna shimmy over here and do this. But yeah, like just enjoy the experience, you know, and especially if you're playing a co-op game, I think you have way more, you know, leeway to bend the rules. If it's competitive, probably not. Like if you, I think you have to stick to the rules because people are gonna
Yeah,
get pretty upset. So I guess
that
it
makes
matters
sense.
what you're playing.
Have you played Unmatched at all?
Mm-mm. No.
Unmatched, I guess, was like a Star Wars IP, and Restoration Games basically used like things that are in the public domain, like Sinbad and King Arthur and all that
Yeah.
stuff, Medusa, and they released this game, and they have a card mechanic in that is really interesting. That you don't roll to attack; it's the cards in your hand are your attack.
Yeah.
Um, but if you need to like boost an attack or boost a movement, you can like use the cards. They also have like a currency number on them, and so you can like discard a card and like move 2 extra spaces to maybe get out of harm's way or to get face to face. And the risk reward of that system I thought was really interesting, something that like it took kind of a basic game and gives it that little bit extra that it needed. Like
Yeah.
might be something to take a look at.
I
There's
will.
just there's so many cool games right now that like, I mean, probably too many, I would argue.
Yeah. It's overwhelming. It really is. And I still like Settlers of Catan. Like, I like that game. I'm kind of embarrassed to say it, but um, they those designers hit something really important. And I think that like I don't want to go too off topic, but like you're never waiting in that game for anything. You're
Sure.
always active, which is really rare to like sit at a table during a game and always be participating.
Right.
So that's something I'm always trying to like take from. Like I want that mechanic in my every game that I create, where like
Right.
no one is bored.
So what's your history with like tabletop wargaming? Because that's typically who I'm talking to, is people who are painting, Warhammer or stuff like
Yeah,
that. Like, have you ever sat down and done any of those big games? I see you got a couple songs of Ice and Fire behind you. Um,
that's the only one that I've really like dove into. I love it. It's probably more simple, I'm assuming, than 40K. I really have no idea.
well, 40K's got like in your army. There's a lot of stuff. Like each army is dramatically different from the next.
Yeah,
But the game itself, like, talk about player agency. Like Games Workshop does not give a fuck if you are having a good time for like 2/3 of that game, because like
interesting.
everything is so slow. Like the first couple turns can be just miserable, watching like an entire side of the board move all at once. And
Yeah,
it's like by the end of it, you're like, God, this is not as fun as it should be. By like turn 3, it's bodies everywhere. You have no idea what's going on. That's the shit that like always gets me. But it always shocks me that everybody is so all right with sitting and doing nothing in war games. And a lot of board games are like that too, where like, you have the one person like sitting there thinking about their thing, and you're all just like, I could go out, I could like do my grocery shopping in the time that this game is moving on, and still get
yeah,
back in time for my turn. And so player agency to me is like the big, if you can keep somebody interested the entire time, that's when like a game is like magic.
yeah. Ice and Fire does that well because it's very little downtime. It's like unit moves on this side, then another unit, back and forth, back and forth. But
Back and
then you
forth.
have like political intrigue cards that you can play.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, it's smart, and it's
Smart.
very fast paced.
Yeah, there's one called Conquest: The Last Argument of Kings. That's a back and forth thing, and that's my current favorite war game that I'm playing, and it's made me realize so much, so many game designers forget what it's like to have fun. Like
Right.
they have great, like really good math, the math hammer of it all. Like okay, they're balanced, they're all this, but like at a certain point the games get too big, and then they're just not fun anymore. You're like,
Right.
why why am I bouncing off of this thing that everybody holds so dear to their heart? And it's made me go back to like the board game world in D&D, where like it is fun and it is this community gathering thing. And I think that game design needs to be more open, because especially as like we aren't together, like you'll have people fall asleep on Tabletop Simulator waiting for an entire
Absolutely.
side.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, like I always relate it to tension. So, like writing fiction, it was always a balance or a discipline of finding the tension between characters and the narrative and developing it and twisting it, but always maintaining some sort of tension no matter what. Like always having, be it a fight or an argument or it's something environmental. So when you apply that to like game design, you always have to respect your players, all the players, and know that that tension has to sort of spread over the table all the time. And how do you do that? I mean, there's many ways to do it, but it's really difficult. And dice are funny too, because like dice in D&D, and I hope this doesn't come off poorly, all dice are cheap tension. So, I mean, it's sort of true. So like, you and I could play D&D and have 0 dice. It wouldn't be a game. It would just be role playing.
Right.
And like, maybe the dungeon master over here could react to what we're doing and tell us what's happening, and we go back and forth. But if we didn't have dice, there'd be no chance, right?
Right.
So in order to create tension, you apply dice. And, it's a little arithmetic or whatever, and you roll, and you don't know the outcome. Like, no one knows the outcome. That rolling action is the tension. And if you can keep repeating that tension over and over and over and drive the narrative.
Sure.
So it's almost like cheating when you're developing a story to have that small tension driver. I don't want to say cheating because it's a game.
Sure.
But it's just an interesting thing to me that in a world where narratively you're relying on tension, you have this device that creates like micro tension.
Yeah.
It's just kind of blows my mind.
I mean, like dice. I mean, Dungeons and Dragons is gambling for nerds. Magic the Gathering is gambling for nerds. All of these things that we are into, where like you can min-max whatever you're doing, but at the end of the day, if dice roll poorly, it's gonna go the exact opposite way that you want to go. And so like when I think of those things, like I love the idea of rolling on stuff mainly to stop the dumb things from happening. I'm like, oh, this is going to be horrible. So like, it's either going to work or it's not.
Yeah.
But like tension moments are like, what do you actually have to lose? So say in your game, like, if the tension and the tactics is, you do a thing and you lose a card, you lose equipment every time that you fail a challenge, a skill check or whatever, that ups the ante, that ups the tension, because there's actual God, what's the term I'm looking for?
Like stake or
stake.
Or...
It's not punishment. Punishment's the wrong term. It's a reaction. Oh my God, I'm having a brain fart day.
Okay.
But there's actual stakes at hand, where like a lot of the time, like I find that you spend a lot of time, rolling for no reason. Like there's no real reason, like, and it's just because like we all buy these like weird accessories and stuff, and I'm fucking totally like, I built myself this like $300 marbled paper dice tray out of picture frames, and I have all my like, I do all this bullshit sitting around, and I'm like, why do I do this? And it's to have like these moments of like rolling die, but I don't think that makes the game better. There's just like me being bored and like playing with shit, so like like how do you keep the tension going? And I always find that like I like it. I like combat to be something that you're always hitting, but maybe you're not rolling for like all the damage. You know, like, oh, you kind of sucked that one, so like take a little like penalty damage, and that way like the mechanic works itself out. But otherwise, it was just like this guy's always going to kill everything. You're going to be bored because you can't do anything. And
Yeah.
so like I do that thing. I'm like, well, you kind of whiffed it, you know, like whatever you can do to make people feel like they have a chance to be helpful. I don't know. Like it's a weird decision there.
I think my solution when I wrote the party backstory generator, like my only requirement for that book was every role affects more than one character. So it's always like whatever you do, it's not personal. It's always going to affect your neighbor or, you know, the person to your left or right or whoever. It's always going to be two or more characters.
Sure. Have you looked at any of the Electric Bastion land stuff at all? Any of that work?
Mm-hmm.
Another OSR oddity where he does a bunch of can you hear me right now?
I can hear you, but you're frozen on the screen.
I am very frozen. Yeah, something just happened. Okay. Well, you can hear me, that's fine. My webcam just died. The light went off of it and everything. All right. Electric Bastion Land has this really interesting flaw system where like every character has a flaw and the flaws are real and hilarious. Okay. And that was something that when I was reading, I was like, this is wild because nobody is perfect. You aren't ever going to have that character that's like 100%, you know, like the badass. It kind of reminded me of like Rogue Legacy, where you're like, I'm this hero who's been coming here, I'm descendant of this, but I'm also colorblind, and so the game's in black and white and stuff like that. Like cool. It was that sort of like idea. I was like, this is a game development thing that actually makes the game more fun, and it makes the stakes very different because like this person has to deal with this on this level. Like I loved it. I thought that meant a lot to me. I was like, oh well, this is brilliant.
That's really cool.
But Justin, we actually have hit our hour, and now that I'm having technical difficulties, I'm gonna figure out what the fuck is going on there. But dude, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me. I'm seriously really excited to see the next stuff that you do. You're either writing, your illustrations, whatever it is. Like you've totally convinced me that like carving your own path is like the way to do it, because it seems like every step of the way it has come with integrity and you know that I really like, and I appreciate that a lot.
That means a lot to me, and I'm always here if people need me. You can just email me from the Severed Books site. Really,
thank you for making it through another episode of Hobby Time in the Murder Basement. I really appreciate your support. If you'd like to continue the support in other ways, I do have a Patreon. The link is down below.
Feel free to email me anytime.
Proceeds from that will go to pay for new equipment, subscription fees if I need it, and graphic design stuff. I'd like to help build this channel. So any of your support is, while never necessary, is always appreciated. If you want to see more hobby stuff, you can head on over to Twitch. I generally stream on Sundays at noon. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.